In the middle of the 2010s, the term gaslighting suddenly became part of our everyday lingo. It was a known term in psychology for many years, but started to gain mainstream usage only recently, used mainly in the online culture wars. Gaslighting means manipulating someone into questioning their perceived reality, and so, much like red pilling, another movie reference, it became a useful term in a battle where everyone is blaming someone for trying to impose a false consciousness on them. For me, however, it had another meaning. One of the first seminar academic works I wrote dealt with the movie Gaslight, from which the term is derived, and so it has a special place in my heart. Recently, I dug it up and realized it is worth publishing. But since I am too cool to publish it in written form, I decided to transform it to the video format. Seeing as I intend to do analyses of cinema on this channel in the future, this can be a good place to start. I wrote this years ago, and since then, I developed some new concepts. The film was released in 1944, which puts it in the period between 1915 and 1965, which I define as a transitional period between the modern age and what I call the pop age. It is a period in which the modern order and the modern mindset, driven by European culture, declined and decayed, whereas the pop mindset, driven by American culture, was beginning to take form and emerge as a new cultural order. Looking back at this seminar paper, I see that while I wasn't thinking in terms of periods yet, I was already aware of this battle between the two paradigms, so it is still relevant to my work today. After 1965, my claim is that modern thought died completely, in every place except academia. What is called postmodernism is academics who realize that the modern age is dead, but keep on thinking in modern terms, so their thinking amounts to beating a dead horse. And I see now that I was already saying it back then as well. For the purpose of this video, I decided to begin by remaining faithful to what I wrote in the paper, and not add any of the ideas and insights I developed since then. This will be the first part of the video. When I am done, I will add a few current thoughts I have on this film. If you want to learn more about my views on the pop age, and my philosophy in general, you can find it in my book Universe Now, linked below. The paper was written as part of my MA studies in philosophy for a seminar that dealt with the other. We were given a choice of articles to react to, and I chose one written by Stanley Cavell, a contemporary American philosopher, who attempted to write an American philosophy extracted from the most American of artistic mediums, Hollywood cinema. In his book Contesting Tears, the Hollywood melodrama of the unknown woman, Cavell puts a spotlight on women in Hollywood melodramas, and how they represent the struggle of women for equality in a Western culture that defines them as the other. One chapter is titled Naughty Orators, and it focuses on the movie Gaslight. My essay was a reaction to this chapter. Before I turn the mic over to my younger self, I will just add that there is one philosophical term that you should be familiar with to watch this video, and that is cogito. The cogito came to prominence due to Descartes' famous saying, cogito ergo sum, translated from Latin to English as, I think, therefore I am. Descartes wanted to find something in existence he can be certain of, and he showed that he could cast doubt about everything in existence, except for one thing, the fact that he is casting doubt in all those things. Therefore, he reasoned, there must be someone who thinks, and able to cast doubt. Thus, he believed, he proved the existence of the I, and it is an I that thinks. The I that thinks is what is called cogito. This assertion of the certain existence of the cogito was one of the main starting points of the Enlightenment movement, which brought about the modern world as we know it. In Naughty Orators, Cavell uses gaslight to discuss the cogito. One of the things that drive Cavell, and from here on I'm quoting my paper, is his wish to find artworks that express the unique American spirit, and it is important to him to show that it is possible to develop a philosophical discussion around Hollywood cinema. Alas, in my opinion, he fails in trying to extract a deep message from the film, and he fails because he doesn't have enough faith in his own argument, doesn't truly believe that Hollywood cinema can be philosophical. Cavell, I will try to show, is imposing his own philosophy on the movie. Had he truly tried to penetrate the spirit of the film, he might have found that it contains a much more radical assertion about the cogito. Gaslight, directed by George Cukor, portrays a woman who gradually loses her mind due to the deliberate actions of her husband, and her struggle to maintain her identity and sanity. This connection between domination, insanity, and struggle for self-expression allows Cavell to put forth his interpretation of Descartes' cogito, to explore how it fits in the tradition of American thought, and also to pit his position against contemporary French readings of Descartes, more specifically with the reading of Jacques Derrida, which is itself a criticism of Michel Foucault's reading. In the face of such vigorous debate around a 350-year-old philosophical concept, there's only one thing left for me to do: add my voice to it, and criticize all three of them. Following is my analysis of the film, and what it says about Descartes' argument. First, a short summary of the plot. Paula Ahlquist is a young woman, an orphan who was raised by her Aunt Alice, a famous opera singer, in mid-Victorian England. But Alice is murdered in the opening scene, and Paula, left without kin, travels to Italy to start a new life. There, she tries to follow her aunt and learn to sing, but when she falls in love with a man named Gregory Anton, she decides to put her personal happiness above her chance of fame. She accepts his marriage proposal, and when he tells her that he dreams to live in London, she takes him back to her childhood home, where they settle. All of her aunt's belongings are locked in the attic. The attic is boarded up, and a new life begins. But we quickly realize that Gregory had ulterior motives in marrying Paula. In a clever and methodical way of diabolical insinuations and mind games, he brings her to think that her memory is playing tricks on her, and that she has a tendency of stealing and of imagining things. In short, that her mind is going. Gradually, Paula starts to believe it herself, especially when she imagines hearing steps coming from the attic that is supposed to be sealed. But the truth eventually comes to light, thanks to the suspicions and investigations of the police detective Brian Cameron. Brian discovers that Gregory was the man who murdered Alice Ahlquist, and his motive was an attempt to rob her priceless jewels. But the robbery was foiled, and the jewels were never found. Hence, he married Paula to gain access to the house and try again. Every night, he steps out of the house and returns to it through a back alley, entering the attic through the skylight and rummaging through Alice's belongings. He also finds out that Paula accidentally found a detail that connects her husband with the murder, and that is why he is trying to undermine her sanity. When he finally verifies his suspicions, Brian enters the house himself, coincidentally on the same night that Gregory finally finds the treasure, and arrests the murderer. Paula, who realizes that she is not insane, asks to be left alone with her bound husband, and Brian reluctantly consents. Once alone, Gregory tries to use his mental domination over his wife to persuade her to help him escape, and for a moment, it seems that he succeeds.
Look into my eyes. If I ever meant anything to you, and I believe I did, then help me, Paula. Give me another chance. Look, in the drawer of that cupboard over there is a knife. Get it and cut me free. Be quick, Paula. Get me the knife, cut me free. Will you get it, Paula? Will you get it for me?
Yes, I'll get it. I'll get it for you.
Hurry, Paula.
There's no knife here.
Yes, I put it there. Look
I
for
don't
it.
see any knife.
I put it there tonight.
No, it isn't here. You must have dreamed you put it there. Are you suggesting that this is a knife I hold in my hand? Have you gone mad, my husband? Or is it I who am mad? Yes, of course, that's it. I am mad. I'm always losing things and hiding things, and I can never find them. I don't know where I put them. That was a knife, wasn't it? And I have lost it. I must look for it, mustn't I? If I don't find it, you'll put me in the madhouse. Where could it be now? Perhaps it's behind this picture. Yes, it must be here.
Instead of releasing him, Paula pretends to be crazy and not understand him, as if he finally drove her completely insane. Realizing that he has to bring her back to sanity, Gregory confesses that he lied to her and she was never crazy, giving her what she needed to hear to finally break out of his spell.
How can a mad woman help her husband to escape?
But you're not mad.
Yes, I am mad, as my mother was mad.
No, Paula. That wasn't true.
After she declares her hate for him, Paula leaves him to the police and is left to face the world on her own. Cavell interprets the film as a drama of the cogito, struggling against an oppressive social situation. In Western culture, and in Victorian culture in particular, the woman is relegated to a place where her voice isn't heard, where she has no channel for individual expression, and her road to happiness is thus blocked. Paula and Gregory's home is a microcosm of this reality, which is here brought to extreme. Due to her social position, Paula has no choice but to humbly accept the insane identity that her husband imposes on her, to be the other of Western culture, the one who has no way to express herself. But the cogito, says Cavell, is universal and belongs to every human, and Paula's mind tries to rebel against this situation, tries to tell itself, like Descartes, I am. Eventually, with her final outburst, Paula manages to affirm her existence, to salvage herself from Gregory's destructive manipulations. But even this moment, says Cavell, is bitter, since Paula's cogito uses the language of madness to affirm itself, showing that it is still the only way for a woman to express herself. The woman's struggle to maintain her thinking individuality within an oppressive society is, for Cavell, the main theme of the movie. The man's role in the story, he argues, is secondary. But is it really so? Is Gregory really nothing but a supporting actor in the real drama, the one that happens in Paula's mind? Or is the main story here different from how Cavell reads it? The answer is given, I surmise, at the end of the film, after Paula had declared her hate for her husband. As he is led outside, Gregory stops by his wife and tells her,
I don't ask you to understand me. Between us all the time were those jewels, like a fire in my brain that separated us. Those jewels which I wanted all my life. I don't know why.
The cab is coming, Mr. Cameron.
Goodbye, Paula.
By this stage, we, like Paula, have concluded that he lied to her about his feelings from the start, and the romance between them was never real. But here, he has nothing to gain from his confession, and there's no reason to doubt its honesty. It suddenly dawns on Paula, and on us, that there was a grain of truth in the happy days she knew in Italy, that the story could have developed otherwise. That, if it wasn't for Gregory, allegedly the representative of the free cogito, who can speak for himself, being enslaved to an external thing, which turns him into the true madman of the story. The main narrative, then, isn't the cogito's struggle for self-expression, but love's struggle to overcome the selfishness of the cogito, and its dependency on something external. All the way from the moment Paula's instructor advises her to give up singing, until Gregory's last confession, we are dealing with the pursuit of happiness, and happiness, here, is described as attained through love. That is, as something interpersonal, achieved for humans who aren't occupied with personal obsessions. This is the true tragedy of the film, and maybe, it seems to be telling us, the main tragedy of Western culture, crippled by the individualism that is the legacy of Descartes' thought. This maybe is what I want to explore. Are there any jewels that Descartes is spellbound by? It cannot be. After all, he begins by stripping himself of any external thing, casting doubt in the realness of everything, in order to rebuild his knowledge on the basis of certainty. But there is one thing, at the least, which he never thinks to doubt: the need for looking for certainty. Throughout, Descartes operates on the basis of several assumptions that are far from being certain. First, that not knowing the truth leads to the corruption of man. Second, that there is a truth that is absolute, eternal, and universal. Third, that the human mind can find this truth. And fourth, that living by the light of absolute truth would ensure a good and happy life. On the basis of that, he launches his ambitious project to figure out this truth, and in the process, he discovers the cogito. It is often said that at the moment of this discovery, the cogito is revealed only as an I think. That is, as something that has only two attributes, individuality and thinking. But actually, the Cartesian cogito already has another attribute, which directs his steps: the yearn to find the eternal and universal truth. The connection, then, is not just between I and think, but between I, thinking, truth, universality, eternity, and happiness. All of these are already contained in the initial cogito. According to Foucault, the birth of cogito in Western thought was also the moment in which its other was born. That is, the state of unreason, of madness. This dichotomy between cogito and madness is the axis around which the discussion takes place in Derrida and Cavell as well. But the Cartesian cogito has another other, an idea which Descartes never thinks to entertain. The idea that truth, happiness, and eternity are actually not dependent on each other. Was Descartes' way truly the only answer to the cynical skepticism of his time? Couldn't he have gone another way, and claimed that human happiness has nothing to do with knowing the absolute truth? Descartes could have argued that the human condition is such that man is always part of a community, and part of his time in history, and the role of reason and philosophy is not to transcend this condition, but rather learn how to conduct yourself in it in the best possible way. And therefore, skepticism shouldn't necessarily lead to cynicism, but simply direct man towards the right path. Descartes, as we know, chose a different path, chose to look for the jewels of eternal truth. And here, keeping in mind what happened to Gregory, we should ask, isn't Descartes' position mad in itself? What is the basis of his assumption that knowing the eternal truth is a good thing? Isn't a measure of unknowing necessary to ensure human happiness? Let's imagine that we knew the absolute truth. What would become, then, of human thought, of humanity's drive to explore, to discover, to create new things? Wouldn't all meaning be taken away from human existence, and we would become no better than robots who can only operate according to their programming? If we step outside Descartes' position into its other, and look at the Cartesian cogito from that perspective, it will appear to us to be held in the throes of madness. Moreover, his theory will appear as suffocating the entire Western culture and preventing it from pursuing happiness. I would like to adopt this perspective and take a critical view of Descartes. I assume, then, that man is a social and historical creature, and that his only way to happiness is finding the best way to live in his time and in the communities he belongs to. From this perspective, Descartes' crime is twofold. First, by pairing happiness and truth with eternity, he prevents us from attaining earthly happiness. As a result of Cartesian thinking, which is nothing but a reaffirmation of Socratic thinking, Western consciousness regards everyday life and its little truths as trivial, since they are not universal and eternal, and in that, it loses the ability to enjoy human existence. Secondly, by pairing truth with the cogito, he harms our ability to happy human relationships. Once individual existence is elevated above social existence, a rift is formed between humans, leading to misery. This, to me, is the message of the film. It's an encounter between a man who pursues individual happiness, a life that transcends regular bourgeois existence, and a woman who wants earthly happiness, achieved through interpersonal relationships. Allegorically, she looks for happiness on the physical plane, while he looks for metaphysical truth. This distinction between woman the physical and man the metaphysical is traditional in Western culture, and usually the attempt is to find balance between the two aspirations, or liberate the man from the stranglehold of the woman so he can reach for the truth. Here, the opposite is the case. The woman is presented as the right party, while the individualistic way of the man is a destructive endeavor that can lead only to misery. Let's tell the story of the movie from this perspective, while maintaining the association between Gregory and the cart, and see what happens. Gregory's way, let's remember, harms Paula's happiness from the start, when he murders her aunt and tears her away from the warm nest she grew in. Paula manages to rebuild herself and start a new life, and even find love and happiness. Humans have the ability to rebuild themselves even as their world is demolished, and create a new world to live in. But Cartesian thought cannot accept this. It aspires to find the real world, the one that is above all historical framings. Gregory comes back to Paula's life, and takes her back to her old home, where she has to face her old identity. Here, at first, Paula thinks that she can, because of her current happiness, deal with the fears of the past. The old belongings that remind her of her aunt are stored in the attic, out of sight but close at hand, maintaining the possibility that she will gradually be able to make peace with her history, make it part of her, and bring some of these belongings back into the house. But Gregory denies her that possibility when he seals the door to the attic. Cartesian thought cannot allow man to accept his historicity. It divides man into body and soul, subject and object, and designates the soul, the subject, as the essential part, the one that is eternal and unchanging, while the body is part of the historical world of becoming and perishing. Rather than allow man to employ his reason to find happiness in the physical, historical plane, the cogito, which is the soul, aspires to transcend the body. But being cogito, who seeks the truth, it must examine the physical and historical world, to find the metaphysical and eternal truths that are hidden within. Hence, while he severs the direct connection between the attic and the house, between history and the present, Gregory re-enters the attic through the back door, through the skylight, just like the cogito's attempt to examine the body as if it was detached from it, as if it was something it has a top-down view on. Gregory's detachment from the body harms his relationship as well, and we see nothing of the sensual love we witnessed before he and Paula entered the house. Additionally, to be able to control Paula, he denies her the ability to associate with other people, and damns her to miserable loneliness. But why doesn't Paula rebel? Is it because, as Cavell argues, she lacks a voice? I don't see it that way. She doesn't rebel because she still believes in love, and wants to overcome the problems and make her relationship with Gregory a happy one. Only when Brian convinces her that her love has no chance to succeed, that there was nothing true in it from the beginning, she breaks away from Gregory's hold and celebrates her victory over him. But is it really a victory? We see that Paula, under the combined influence of Gregory and Brian, adopts the Cartesian madness and starts to think in the selfish way of the cogito, even though she knows it is madness.
If I were not mad, I could have helped you. Whatever you had done, I could have pitied and protected you. But because I am mad, I hate you. Because I am mad, I have betrayed you, and because I am mad, I'm rejoicing in my heart without a shred of pity, without a shred of regret, watching you go with glory in my heart.
Eventually, Paula gives up on love and chooses to express her personal freedom through gloating at Gregory's downfall. Cavell sees this as the moment of liberation, which, according to his worldview, should lead to happiness. I don't feel it in the scene. The way I see it, Paula's outburst is presented as a rather futile act, which does not provide her any happiness. Even before that, we already witnessed the shattering of the Cartesian ideal, of the belief that the cogito can examine the world from a top-down position, as if it was separated from it. We see that there is no real split between the attic and the house, between body and soul. Gregory's rummaging in the attic deeply affects what is happening in the house, undermining Paula's sanity. He finally succeeds, finds the jewels, and then returns into the house by breaking the door that he sealed. If we continue our allegory, this is the moment when the cogito, immersed in its inspection of the outside world, finds the truth it was seeking, and returns to itself with full knowledge and ability to control its existence. But when Gregory returns home, he finds that control slipped from his hands at the moment of triumph. His actions and investigations led to the undermining of the stability of his life, the stability he took for granted, and his home has changed. Gregory manages to temporarily regain control over his domain, but it is no longer the same domain. Once he removed the barrier between the house and the attic, he allowed others to go through it and destroy his world. Brian, the rational detective, manages to retrace Gregory's steps and enters the house through the attic to bring down the ruling order. Thus, the path paved by Descartes opened up the way for other philosophers to follow him and undermine his worldview. Foucault, for instance, shows us that the cogito is nothing but an idea that was born in a certain moment in history, in which Western consciousness was rearranged in a different way from before, and new borders of reason and unreason were formed. And Derrida turns this moment into the constitutive moment of every philosophy, and argues that out of such crises, such moments when the borders between reason and unreason dissolve, the cogito recreates itself anew, and forms new borders. Foucault and Derrida, then, sever the connection between the cogito and eternity, and insert it into history. Still, though, they do so while following Descartes' footsteps, just like Brian follows Gregory's footsteps to enter the house. And so, the cogito still reigns supreme, and Western worldview continues to be determined by it. This is why Cavell takes an apologetic tone when justifying his interest in Hollywood films. A mind shaped by traditional Western philosophy cannot fathom that classic Hollywood, that is, between the early 20s and the late 50s, has anything of value to tell us. It is well known that the movies made in those years were not the creation of one artist, looking to express their individual vision and discover eternal truths, but were a commercial production which many worked on. The screenwriter would write the script, the producer would purchase it and cast the actors, the director, and the editor. The director would appropriate the script to his strengths and to the personalities of the stars in the leading roles, and finally, the editor would edit the footage in a way that would delight the audience and appease the producer. Who could even think that any artistic or philosophical statements could be made out of such an amalgamation of interests and wills? To justify himself, Cavell has to, or he feels that he has to, show that cinema can express so-called deep statements, and better than other mediums could. His argument, as far as I understood it, is that American thinking has different sensibilities from European thinking, and that American cinema, in its best moments, manifests those sensibilities. Hollywood cinema, then, doesn't have its own philosophy in Cavell's opinion, but is merely a medium that can be used to enter and explore the American spirit. To truly shed off the cart, I claim, we need to take the route that Paula takes in the end, and go through the door in the opposite direction, from the house to the attic. Meaning, we need to ask if Hollywood cinema, that expression of popular culture that is seen as incapable of creating a philosophical statement, in other words, constituting the other of Western thought, can in fact provide us with its own philosophy. This paper is too short for such a task, but I shall use it to say a few things about Hollywood, while focusing on the production of the film we are discussing. Gaslight was originally a play written in the 1930s by the British playwright Patrick Hamilton and adapted into an English film in 1940, before it was purchased by MGM and given the more famous adaptation. The comparison between the English and American versions tells us a lot about the motivation of the Hollywood makers. In the English version, the husband is emphatically the main character. He is the one who initially lived in the house, and he murdered his aunt to get the jewels. But he couldn't find them, so he married a rich woman to be able to purchase the house and continue searching. We see that he is a Victorian gentleman who has been corrupted, and his corruption is manifested in the affair that he is having with the maid, not to mention that he goes with her to music hall, actually enjoying this popular and lower form of entertainment. The original movie, then, still holds traditional Victorian values and attributes the corruption of Gregory to his giving up on these values. The American version, on the other hand, is a Hollywood caricature of Victorian England, including the sanctimonious, gossipy old spinster.
The way she carries on with that policeman on the beat, it's scandalous. There, that's all there is. Fly away, pigeons, more tomorrow. Well!
The awfully common maid, with a distinct Cockney accent.
Suppose the master comes back and asks where you've gone.
Well, tell him I just went for a walk.
By yourself, Mum?
And, of course, the foreign, mysterious, dark, suave European man, or, as they say in Hollywood, Charles Boyer, somewhat reminiscent of Dracula, who comes to suck the blood of innocent Victorian women. Beyond the caricature, though, there is a reversal in the plot, which becomes a criticism of Victorian values. The affair between Gregory and the maid is turned into nothing more than a flirt, probably signaling his impotency, which symbolizes the impotent nature of Victorian culture as a whole. While the English version regards popular culture, with its vulgar sensuality, as a manifestation of corruption, the American version regards high European culture, with its lack of sensuality, as a manifestation of lifelessness. Paula is the representative of a healthy, loving sensuality, and this is why she becomes the main figure in this version. Another change in the plot is the addition of Gregory's final confession, showing that his corruption was not the outcome of vulgarization, but of his selfishness, that led him away from natural sensuality. We see, then, that the film is an attack by American pop culture, Hollywood being its main representative in those years, on European so-called high culture. Just as Paula uses the fact that Gregory is tied to a chair to take his words and turn them against him, so does Hollywood exploit the decline of European culture and reappropriates a European play to overturn its message. It is telling that MGM tried, fortunately unsuccessfully, to purchase all the copies of the original movie and destroy them. But here, we must ask, what is actually the alternative that we are presented with? Is there any philosophical statement here? Is it not just the rejection of individual freedom and the metaphysical quest in favor of what is merely the American family values? As far as this movie is concerned, it is admittedly the case, but this admission isn't the end of it. If we end it here, it would be simply because we are still enslaved by Cartesian thought, which glorifies individualism and eternity, and believes their rejection cannot lead to anything beyond a mundane existence. But if we take the other perspective, then we will search for our ideals in everyday life and in a communal existence, and then bourgeois family values would be just one form of existence, one among many. Once we do that, we will also be able to find ideals in Hollywood cinema. Let's return to Cavell's article. In one place, he compares his stance to Derrida's, and one of the differences he finds is that Derrida is fully conscious when he philosophizes, driven by his rationality, while he feels that philosophy is something that imposes itself on him, something external to his rationality, but still something that is driving him. Cavell concludes that he is driven by something that is above history, in contrast with Derrida, who always philosophizes within history, and is immersed in language games. But is this a valid conclusion? What is the basis for his belief that what is external to rationality is transhistorical? Couldn't it be that it is simply a sensibility that arises from the society and the historic moment he is in? In other words, what if what drives him is what is commonly known as the zeitgeist? The term zeitgeist has associations of triviality, but this, of course, is merely the result of the way of thinking we defined as madness, the thinking that is enslaved to the ideal of eternity. If we define man as a historic and social being, then the zeitgeist is his deepest truth. Cavell draws an interesting comparison between Hollywood cinema and psychoanalysis, and shows that they both drew some of their insights from discussing women's suffering. That is, a discussion about the suffering of the other. But the rise of Hollywood was also strongly linked to the rise of another phenomenon, also created by a group that was in the position of the other: jazz music, the voice of African American culture. In jazz, the ideal does not bud in the head of one artist who looks for eternal ideas, but rises out of the interactions between several artists who create the ideal together. And if we accept that ideals can be born in this way as well, then the fact that a Hollywood movie isn't a brainchild of one artist with one vision, but the outcome of a collaboration between several visions, should not deter us from looking for deep statements in it. To say it differently, liberation will come not when the woman gets to have a voice in the Cartesian world of the man, as Cavell wants, but from us trying to penetrate this otherness that is foisted on the woman, and search for our ideals there. Cartesian thought places human rationality at the heart of philosophy, and attempts to use it to uncover eternal truths. In contrast, romantic thought claims that rationality is actually the thing that stands in our way of finding the truth, and romantic artists try to manifest the irrational, the sublime. Both, however, are united in their aspiration to connect to the eternal. And lo, rational thought led to thinkers like Foucault and Derrida, who claim that the rational is not eternal, but redefines itself throughout history. This implies that the irrational changes as well, and sublime art is not one that speaks in terms of eternity, but rather one that tries to ideally manifest the spirit of the time. This necessitates a redefinition of the ideal of art. Alas, Western thought, to a great extent, is still bound by its yearn for the eternal. And as long as this is the case, the idea that one can find deep statements in Hollywood cinema will remain the unthinkable, and philosophers analyzing movies will be considered, if not crazy, then at least as following a craze. Cavell's attempt to find logic in the craziness is mostly a failure, since he still thinks in terms that are not compatible with the subject he is analyzing. On the other hand, an honest attempt to delve into the spirit of Hollywood and extract its most basic intuitions can set philosophy on a new course. Alright, that was the paper that I wrote, all those years ago. It now reads like a declaration of intent. I said that Hollywood cinema, and pop culture in general, is the thing that we must explore if we want to understand our time and set philosophy on a new course. Since then, I tried to do exactly that, and developed many new concepts and ideas. What I want to do up to the end of the video is to re-watch Gaslight, and see what insights I can add today. One thing I developed since then is my division of history into periods. The battle I described here Between the thought of contemporary philosophers and my thought, I now ascribe to the rise of a new age with a new paradigm. According to my categorization, we are currently in the pop age, whereas those thinkers were thinking in terms that were taken from the modern age. The modern age begins in late 18th century and ends around 1965. It is characterized by the rebellion against the belief that we should work for heaven in the afterlife, in favor of the belief that heaven should be created here on earth. The modern man perceived himself as constantly progressing towards this ideal. The pop age begins around 1915 as a rebellion against the modern belief that heaven should be found in the future, in favor of the idea that heaven can be attained in the here and now. In the pop age, heaven becomes part of daily life, perfect moments in a life that is otherwise imperfect, but still mostly good and happy. I also divide these ages into several periods. The period of time between 1830 and 1875 is what I call the novel period. This was the time when the liberal order took over in Western Europe, and bourgeois culture started to set the tone. It follows the Romantic period, which was typified by rebellion against the feudal order to establish this new order. After its success, the prevailing belief now was that man progresses through history to perfect himself and his society, and that the liberal society is the culmination of this progress. Therefore, there is no more need for revolution, and the focus now should be on working together to perfect the system. I call it the novel period because this was when the great realistic novels were written, novels that attempted to encompass all of society, gripped in the drama of trying to settle all its differences. In Britain, this is the height of the Victorian period, that struck a balance between maintaining traditional values on the one hand and using scientific progress to improve society on the other. The 1860s, however, witnessed the rise of a new mindset. Many young people felt that society is not progressing in the right direction, and the liberal order will not take us towards perfection. The years 1865 to 1925 is what I call the modernist period, which is typified by individuals trying to break out of the liberal order to find something better. In the novel period, it was believed that we should build upon our traditions. In the modernist period, the belief was that our traditions are the thing that is holding us back, and we must use our human faculties to try to reach the truth that they are concealing from us. Note that we are still in the modern mindset. The modernists still believe that the ideal should be to reach perfection, but while before it was all of society working on it together, now the hero became the individual genius, who can transcend the bad traditions that are holding us back and create something more truthful. This individualist could either work on his own perfection, or put forth ideas that have done society as a whole.
You know, you wouldn't have had time to see them anyway. You have to dress, do your hair.
Why?
We're going out tonight.
We are? Oh, you didn't tell me. Or have I forgotten?
Don't you think this is charming? It's from the new operetta, The Gaiety. I wish I could write tunes like Strauss. Paula, you silly child, don't look like that. Of course you haven't forgotten anything. This is my surprise for you. We're going to the theater tonight.
Oh, Greg. Oh, no. Oh, how wonderful.
And you thought I was being cruel to you.
No, you're not cruel.
Keeping people away from you. Making you a prisoner.
The music is out of Die Fledermaus, the famous operetta, which premiered in 1874. This puts the time of the movie right at the end of the novel period, and I love that it does that, because we are indeed witnessing its death. Paula is still in this mindset, believing she can find happiness within the contemporary order. But Gregory is already in the modernist mindset, believing that he must transcend this order to find happiness. He is going his own way to find the jewels that are hidden somewhere in the house, buried underneath the current order, and using his genius to achieve what he wants. In the process, he is also destroying the old order.
Oh, Gregory. What's the matter?
Paula, I don't want to upset you. If you will put things right when I'm not looking, we'll assume it did not happen.
But what? Gregory, what? Oh, please don't turn your back on me. What has happened?
You mean you don't know?
No,
Look.
Yes. The little picture has been taken down. Who took it down? Why has it been taken down?
Why indeed?
Obviously, the makers of the film didn't think in the terms that I presented here. They weren't really giving it that much thought. Hollywood, at the time, didn't even bother to be historically accurate. There is music in the movie that comes from a later date. However, they were definitely aware of the fall of this modern European culture. The period between 1915 and 1965 is what I call the late modernist period, and in it, the modern order crumbled. In the modernist period, remember, it was individualists who were trying to break out of the liberal order. In the late modernist period, it was movements that were also trying to force it on others. The transitional phase between the periods, the years 1915 to 1925, saw the rise of the totalitarian regimes in Europe. Gaslight was made during the war years, when these regimes proceeded to demolish the continent, and Gregory's behavior is meant to invoke a totalitarian ruler. It is not coincidental that he has a European accent. This period, 1915 to 1965, is also the transitional phase between the modern age and the pop age. Within the frame of the pop age, I call it the Hollywood period. This period is typified by living in the modern world, but instead of thinking of progressing towards a perfect future, it was about learning how to use modern advancement to enjoy the present. The mediums that ruled this period, radio, jazz music, pulp fiction, comic books, were all about capturing the moment in the hectic, ever-changing modern world. And the medium that brought it all together was Hollywood cinema. This mindset and the pop culture it created were born in America, and at first, this culture felt itself inferior to modern European culture. Gaslight comes at a period when this begins to change. The American elites were still beholden to the Europeans, but the creators and consumers of pop culture already started to realize that their culture is a lot healthier. The 1940s is when they started to think that what they are doing, maybe, is not just entertainment, but art. In my paper, I admitted that, while classic Hollywood does present a philosophical and artistic alternative to modern art, the film itself does not. Now that I've explored some more into the art of Hollywood cinema, I would like to revisit, and perhaps revise, this assertion. The period between 1955 and 2005 is what I call the rock and roll period. In this period, modern thought died completely, whereas pop culture developed its intuitions to present a powerful alternative. As a result, it also started to take itself more seriously. In cinema, the mid-50s saw the rise of some young French critics, contemporaries of Foucault and Derrida, who were the first to regard cinema, and particularly Hollywood cinema, as an art form. they focused on the role of the director, whom they saw as the artist who creates the movie. They were, of course, aware that Hollywood directors were merely part of a team, but claimed that some Hollywood directors possessed a personal vision, which they were able to express through the films that they were chosen to direct. This perception of the film director as the auteur, the true creator, soon affected young directors everywhere, including America, and was the perception that dominated in the rock and roll period. This perception, however, still borrowed from modern ideas of the individual genius. This is not what the cinema of the Hollywood period was about. Classic Hollywood wasn't about the directors. It was about the stars. Hollywood actors were not signed for their acting ability, but for a certain quality they possessed, a certain magical thing that happened when you saw them on the big screen. It is hard to put this quality into words, but we can all feel its effect. The Hollywood studios would search for people, usually just common folk, who had that quality, that glamour. Once they found them, they would search for the type of personality that would make it shine, and once that personality was found, the actor then became identified with it, and would play it in every movie they made. Those actors, who became identified with one personality, were what was called stars. The films were tailor-made to fit the stars, and everyone, including, of course, the directors, focused mainly on making them shine. Thus, they became role models, archetypes of how one should exist in the modern world. In the Hollywood period, people all over the world followed those stars, each having one they regarded as the role model to be imitated. After the Hollywood period ended, most of these stars were forgotten, but some grew even larger and became legends, icons of pop culture. Throughout the rock and roll period, they kept shining on, still serving as archetypes to be emulated. We have one such legend in this movie, of course, and when you look at Ingrid Bergman's performance, you can see why. There are many shots in which the camera just lingers on her face, close up, and she has the ability to keep you magnetized with just minute changes in her facial expressions. I actually find her acting to be lacking at times, and she tends to over-exaggerate. But her ability to project those delicate emotions is where cinema is superior to theatre, and it is the thing that Hollywood knew how to do best of all. When you watch the British version, it is still too close to theatre for me. The Hollywood version is something else. In the first half of the 1940s, the men were overseas, at war. American women had to fill in for them in the workplace, and Hollywood stepped in to provide models of women who could make it in a man's world. The most famous star of the decade was Katharine Hepburn, who went on to be widely considered the greatest female Hollywood legend of them all. Strong, independent, witty, elegant, and sexy, she inspired independent women everywhere. Her best movies were directed by George Cukor, whose subtle directing style made him, in an industry that had no female directors, the best director of women. This made him the obvious choice to direct Gaslight, but with the character of Paula, the strong and outgoing Hepburn character wouldn't do. Someone else was needed, and here, too, the choice was obvious. Ingrid Bergman offered another version of the 40s woman. Her character was strong and independent, but also fragile and vulnerable, driven by strong emotions. She played roles of women thrown into tough situations that challenged their strength, usually the result of being madly in love with a questionable man. Gaslight provided the perfect vehicle for her. Unlike the British version, in which the first time we meet the female lead is after she had married, here we first see her trying to make it on her own, but eventually giving up on a potential career, and even fame, for the sake of love. The contrast between the independent woman that she was, and the basket case she becomes after being terrorized by her husband, makes the story that more compelling. It dramatizes what many women felt, at a time when they were already vying for independence, but still living in a world that had remnants of the Victorian mindset. In my paper, I took the discussion away from the individualist cogito and its search for eternal meaning, and claimed that the art of Hollywood is collaborative art, which focuses on the here and now. But within this new mindset, the individual also has to assert itself. In jazz, the musical piece is created together, on the spot, but it also gives room for every musician to display their unique individual expression. Hollywood cinema does the same. The stars are models of individuality that lives in the now, in the modern world, and tries to make the most out of it. The stars are the archetypes, and the movies serve them. When we inquire what the art of gaslight is, then, what we should be asking is, how does it allow for the Ingrid Bergman archetype to be expressed? And this is how the other films from the Hollywood period, and sometimes even later movies, should be viewed. So, what can we say of Gaslight in this regard? Well, the story takes place at a time when the man was the master of the household and could exert complete control over his wife and servants. Paula becomes the victim of this order, and also of the fact that in Victorian times, being treated for mental illness was a scandal and a stigma, and the fear of that prevents her from seeking outside help. In the English version, the actress does a good job of portraying her total helplessness and despair. But in the Hollywood version, it becomes all the more powerful, because it is not done to just any woman, but to Ingrid Bergman, whom we know for her keen mind and independent character. Paula remains defiant throughout, trying to fight against the situation, and her struggle to break free of the mental prison and become Ingrid Bergman again gives the film the kind of power that only Hollywood can give. The story makes clever use of the technology of the 19th century, namely the gas lights that were used to provide lighting. Whenever another light is lit in the house, it makes the overall light go dimmer, as the gas has to be distributed to more spots. When Gregory does his thing in the attic, he turns on the light, and the effect it has on the lights in the house makes Paula go crazy, as she is unable to explain it. The light becomes a metaphor for her sanity, which she feels that she is losing. This can already be found in the original version, but in the Hollywood adaptation, it allows the director to make use of the techniques that were developed at the time, and later became known as film noir. The heyday of film noir was from the early 40s to the mid-50s, when films were shot mainly in black and white due to budget shortages, and made clever use of shadows to manifest the shadowy world of the 40s which we are trying to break out of. Here, it is used to dramatize Paula's struggle and the horror of her situation. No other medium but cinema could be so effective in creating this sensation. This story of an individual battling against the world also makes it an existentialist movie. On my main channel, I made a long video discussing the connection between existentialism and Hollywood cinema, mainly film noir, focusing on the works of Albert Camus and Humphrey Bogart. If you want to see a much more comprehensive discussion of the Hollywood period, and how it hosted the transition between the modern age and the pop age, watch this video. Needless to say, it also contains a lengthy discussion of a very special movie, in which Bogart and Bergman co-star together. There is, of course, a strong influence of psychoanalysis in Gaslight. Bergman's performance, her ability to display a tempest of emotions under the surface, is perfect for this character who tries to maintain her sanity while being gaslighted. Many of the metaphors in the movie, the attic that contains repressed memories, the gaslights that dim whenever Paula thinks she is losing her mind, the healing that comes once the attic is busted open and the truth comes out, can be given a psychoanalytical interpretation, which I avoided in my analysis. For more on psychoanalysis and cinema, watch this video I made about surrealist and psychedelic cinema. It doesn't discuss Gaslight, but it does discuss Spellbound, another one of Bergman's key roles. The philosophers I criticized in my paper, Cavell, Foucault and Derrida, all started writing in the 1960s, right at the end of the modern age. They were aware of it, too. Foucault and Derrida are the two most prominent names in what is called postmodernism. The problem with postmodernism, however, is that it still thinks in modern terms, and thus cannot offer a true alternative. Foucault and Derrida both continued to search for the spirit in mediums that were already dead, like literature, poetry, and painting, instead of shifting their view to the new, vital mediums of American pop. It is actually a problem with France as a whole that insisted on resisting American influence, and as a result, became culturally irrelevant, as the French spirit decayed. Cavell, the American, represents a step in the right direction, taking his cues from Hollywood cinema. But he, too, was still too bound to modern notions, and was unable to see the alternative that Hollywood, and pop culture, present. We are now, actually, out of that period as well. The rock and roll period ended around 2005, and since 1995 we are in what I call the cyber period. This period has new mediums, new rules. It is still part of the pop age, but I sense that we are already in a transitional phase to something else, and some of the insights developed in previous periods no longer offer a way to a meaningful and happy life. We need to develop some new insights, but in order to do so, we should first understand how we got here, and that is why I explore the pop age in a way that no one else, as far as I know, does. For more insights on how the cinema of the Hollywood period inspired the rock and roll period, watch this video, part of my series on glam rock. Well, what do you know? Ingrid Bergman plays a significant role in this one as well. And keep watching this channel. There's lots more to come.